This is the disaster management in the context of healthcare lecture. So let's set the expectations. At the end of the lecture, you as the student should be able to understand the basic framework of disaster preparedness, response, recovery, mitigation in the context of the health system, as well as actually being able to define these words that are used and sometimes improperly by those who are actively managing disasters themselves. At the same time, you should have basic foundational knowledge about our local disaster risk reduction and management in health framework. So this is the one used by the DOH, as well as the International Health Emergency and Disaster Risk Management Framework of the World Health Organization. And then once we know these two frameworks, you should be able to apply what you have learned to real world situations as a participant during times of crises and disasters. So, just a small note, I am recording this on the evening of July 27, 2025. It's a Sunday. I had just come from the graduation of the UERM for all of the health colleges. Okay, and this has been a pretty rough week. I think this is yeah the week. I think the whole week there has been no classes. From Monday to Friday. When I was in school, whenever there was a typhoon, at most only 2 days would be lost, and that only happened during the tail end uh, of my education. That was during the time I was a medical student. But when I was in elementary school and middle school and high school, I came from a K to 12 system, an international school. Uh, at most, we would only lose 1 day whenever there was a typhoon. So now, we've gotten to the point that we actually lose multiple days to torrential storms. So there is now a changing phase of disasters, of hydrometeorological hazards. Okay? And finally, we should be able to grasp basic concepts in disaster management in all levels of the health system. So, no matter where you are as a participant in the health system, whether you become a municipal health officer or as maybe one day one of the people in your class will become a director in the Health Emergency Management Bureau, or one of you will become even an assistant secretary, undersecretary, or even the secretary of health. You should be able to grasp disaster management because, again, the Department of Health is the leading uh, agency when it comes to the health aspects of disaster management. So imagine this in 2012. Uh, there were a bunch of stakeholder consultations and intergovernmental negotiations conducted by the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. Uh, and it was formalized in 2014 to 2015 as the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. This was supposed to cover the years 2015 to 2030. We are only 5 years away from the end of this of the planned COVID period. So I I surmise that within the next few years there will be an improvement as well as additional principles to add to the Sendai framework. And I'm not going to read each and every one of these guiding principles. I am only going to highlight that again, number one. So I'm going to use the tool here. the primary responsibility is should be borne by the member states. So these are the nation states that are members of the United Nations. And above all, protection of persons and their assets while promoting and protecting all human rights, including the right to development. Okay, this is an interesting principle because it also includes the person. It doesn't take away the context of the person's assets. So whether these are uh, their own personal property or their own livelihoods. Okay, and protecting all human rights. So human rights are included whenever we think about disaster management. Okay, and then of course engagement from all of society. Okay, you cannot do disaster management by yourself, by one sector, by there is a proposal right now being floated that there should be a department for disaster management in the upper legislature. I think it's being floated by Senator Jinggoy Estrada. And one of the things that we will find out later why this might be not be such a wise idea is that it is being centralized when in reality disaster management should come from all levels, all layers, and multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary. So you engage all aspects of your society, whether it is your health workers, whether it is the private sector, whether it is your urban planning and your academics. Okay? So all of these people need to be engaged, need to have their knowledge and their expertise tapped to help understand and to help manage disasters effectively. Lastly, decision making must be inclusive and risk informed while using a multi hazard approach. Okay, so it has to be contextually appropriate, and we also have to understand, especially for a country like the Philippines, that we don't just have hydrometeorological hazards, we also have other forms, seismological hazards, volcanic hazards, and just recently, biological hazards. Okay, so for the second part of our guiding principles of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, you'll notice again, this is according to my notes here. I should highlight also the first bullet point. Again, I'm not going to read it for you, but notice that your disaster risk reduction and basically your disaster management should be coherent and should align with your sustainable development policies, plans, practices, and mechanisms across different sectors. Why? Because there is no sustainable development without effective disaster risk reduction and disaster management. And notice there is actually disaster risk reduction, not just disaster management. So that means you are avoiding having the disasters affect people already. It shouldn't be just disaster response. It's not like surprised Pikachu face that, oops, it's flooding again. Let's respond to this disaster. It should be, we should reduce the likelihood of people being affected by floods. And how do we do that? We don't make them live in waterways. We don't continue to basically not have any sensible urban planning for a megalopolis like Metro Manila. Okay? And again, you have to read the rest of the principles, but other things that are repeatedly highlighted one way or another address underlying risk factors cost effectively. So investment in avoiding the disaster. So it's not just mitigation, it's already disaster prevention. Okay? So stop building super tall buildings, even if you say that they are earthquake resistant, that doesn't make it earthquake proof. We live in a country that is seismologically active, and yet you keep on putting all of these condominium units. Okay, so there's partly a potential problem. Okay, so invest in ways that uh, you don't need to have post disaster response and recovery, so you avoid the disaster altogether. And hand in hand with that, because we are always continually improving, continually learning, you have to build back better. So to prevent the disaster, once you've faced a previous disaster, you have to build back better. You have to learn ways to avoid a repeat of the existing disaster risk. Okay? So these are nice principles that should be followed for the Sendai framework. Now, here is the question I want to ask you individually, who is listening to this lecture, and to those who are to you as a class. Is this framework being followed locally? Is it being followed in our country? So the Philippine model of disaster management is the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council, which until very recently, August 2011, so just 14 years ago, was called the National Disaster Coordinating Council. And I think for obvious reasons, you will understand why it was wise to rename it, because it sounds like they are coordinating disasters. And it is administered by the Office of Civil Defense, which is under the Department of National Defense. And the issuances about regarding the NDRRMC come from the Presidential Decree 1566, series of 1978. So that is Ferdinand Marcos Sr.'s time. Executive Order number 832 series of 2009. So this is during the time of Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. And Republic Act 101, or the Philippine Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act of 2010. So that actually formalized the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council. So let's do this. Let's have a brief exercise. Write down four things that you think are the functions or mandate of the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council. Okay. Then hit pause. Write those four things down and see within the next few slides if they are there. So the NDRRMC mandate, the powers and functions, it involves developing a framework that is comprehensive, all hazards, multi-sectoral, interagency, and community-based approach to disaster risk reduction and management. Yada, yada, yada. And it's also a mouthful, okay? NDRRMC, disaster risk reduction and management. uh, we're trying to be comprehensive here, but in on the other side of the Pacific, it's just the Federal Emergency Management Authority, so FEMA. Okay, so they made it already. They simplified it. Here we have to put all of these words, and yet somehow we're still despite this comprehensiveness, I'm sure a lot of you will agree that we are still lacking in a lot of ways. There's still a lot of gaps and a lot of objectives and goals that need to be reached to be actually to actually become effective disaster managers. Okay, for the NDRRMC to become the government agency, the multi-sectoral government interagency and council that everyone envisions it to be. Okay? And again, another plan aside from the framework is an actual plan consistent with the framework. So You have your framework, which is a policy, and you have your plan, which is what to do. So think of it as a flowchart that adheres to the policy, which is how you the strategy of how you go about things. Okay, so the framework is the policy, and the plan is the actual flowchart or the actual way that we are going to do that is consistent with the current strategy. And then another part of their power and their function is to advise the president. So it's a council, and this council will advise the president on the status of your preparedness, prevention, mitigation, response, and rehabilitation operations being undertaken not just by the government but civil society organizations, the private sector, and recommend whether a state of calamity is needed in areas that are extensively damaged, and submit proposals to restore the normalcy in those affected areas, including, again, allocating funds. One thing that you will learn when it comes to disaster management, a lot of times it's all a matter of channeling funds and finances or budget from public coffers to address the current situation uh, through various agencies and partner organizations and third-party contractors that constitute the private sector. Part of the NDRRMC mandate includes ensuring multi-stakeholder participation. So again, not just the national agencies, but also your civil society organizations, and use technology such as your geographic information system-based national risk map to help develop policy, planning, and decision-making tools. Establish your early warning and emergency alert systems. So for those who use iOS, and I think even Android has this now, but Android I think is SMS, whereas for iOS, it's a god awful screen that I do not resent. I try to. It is designed to make our heart race, but the fact that it works, the fact that it rattles you means that the system is working. Okay, and I would prefer this, where I get alerted, where I get inconvenienced, where I learn that there is a potential hazard coming my way, than one where I am caught unaware and I am affected and unprepared for a disaster. Okay? And then again, develop appropriate risk transfer mechanisms, so the risk doesn't just affect a single group, but instead the risk is transferred and minimized, that guarantees social and economic protection and includes resiliency in the face of disaster. And I know resiliency is a very dirty word right now because it's always about resiliency whenever we face disasters, when it should be effective disaster management by the by our leaders, by our governing agencies. So this slide is self-explanatory. As I mentioned a few slides back, a lot of our um, disaster management is all about mobilizing resources, letting loose resources, including the budget, including materials, equipment, from the central offices, from the headquarters of your national agencies in Metro Manila, uh, to the areas where they are affected, to your local government units, to the yeah. A lot of times, your national agencies will brag about being able to procure state-of-the-art equipment for disaster management, but they're all here in Metro Manila when the disaster is in, say, Sultan Kudarat or in Tawi-Tawi or say in Bohol. And what is it doing in Metro Manila? Is it just aura farming? No, you have to pre-position, you have to be able to have all of these at the ready when and where they are needed. Okay? And then monitor and provide your necessary guidelines and procedures on local disaster risk reduction. Again, so local. So now we're moving from a national level to a local level, including the release of said funds with guidelines to ensure that this is properly utilized, properly accounted for, and there is proper auditing. Okay, so that no one is screaming that the funds are being used improperly or that there is corruption. Like I said, um, back when I was still in school, elementary, middle school, high school, undergrad, and medical school, whenever we had typhoons, at most we would lose only 2 days. And when I was earlier, it was only 1 day, but now we have the realities of climate change affecting us. So again, the NDRRMC does not exist in a vacuum and should closely coordinate with the Climate Change Commission, and there should be the vertical and horizontal coordination mechanisms for more coherent implementation of disaster risk reduction and management policies and programs between these agencies and their local government units, and formulate a national institutional capability building program for disaster risk reduction and management, and address the weaknesses of various government agencies and local government units on a biennial. So that means uh, 2 times a year baseline assessment and studies. So again, this is self-explanatory, but the NDRRMC has a R&D arm, and again, the question is the R&D actually being used properly, and are we actually addressing the realities of disasters in the era where we are finding out what climate change actually does. We're no longer in the, pardon my French, F around phase. We are now in the finding out phase of what happens when we ignore the reality of climate change. Okay? So the paradigms that are still being used are the paradigms that were maybe relevant 10, 20 years ago, but now we have to address the fact that our torrential rains will now bring floods. But we're still prepared for it as though the floods are only going to happen in, say, one area, or that it's only going to take 1 day, but now it actually takes several days. Okay. And again, technical management groups. So you should have experts in various agencies, departments, offices, and organizations to coordinate and meet to effectively manage disasters on a national and local levels. The NDRRMC mandate, and I promise this is the last slide for the mandate, with the OCD, or the Office of Civil Defense, being the head, will conduct periodic assessment and performance monitoring of the member agencies, which we will talk about, as well as your regional disaster risk reduction and management councils, as defined in the plan, in the NDRRM plan, and coordinate or oversee implementation of the country's obligations with disaster management treaties to which it is a party, and see to it that the country's disaster management treaty obligations be incorporated in its DRRM framework policies, plans, programs, and projects. So that means that the Philippines does not exist in a vacuum. Okay? During the time of Yolanda, we received a lot of help from our neighbors from across the Pacific Ocean in helping to manage the period after the disaster. And we, in turn, should our neighbors need help, should another country in another part of the world need help, should be ready because we have our own treaties that we have entered, including the Sendai Framework, including our obligations in the United Nations. So that is also part of our plan, so that even if we have a disaster here in the Philippines, we can still have the ability, because of our obligations, to send our own teams to help and assist in managing disasters in other nation states. So the leadership of the NDRRMC, as you can see, has the Department of National Defense Secretary as its chair or head, which, when you think about it, makes sense because the agency that is that oversees NDRRMC is the Office of Civil Defense, which is under the DND. And then you have your vice chair for preparedness, which is the Department of the Interior and Local Government. For response, it's the Department of Social Welfare and Development Secretary. For prevention and mitigation, it is your Department of Science and Technology. And for your National Economic Development Authority, overseeing as vice chair for rehabilitation and recovery. Notice this, preparedness, response, prevention and mitigation, rehabilitation, and recovery are the four phases of the disaster management cycle. And it makes sense that the DILG secretary, the one in charge of the local government units, so your provincial government, your municipal government, down to your barangay barangay chairman and your barangay council will be in charge of preparedness because they have the local context. They know the local context, which are what are the local hazards. Whereas for response, it's the Department of Social Welfare and Development. Okay, so we again, it makes sense because during the time of during that period after a disaster has happened, they will mostly be the ones in charge of overseeing evacuation efforts, overseeing that aid goes properly to those that need it, particularly for those affected and for those for evacuees. Okay? Meanwhile, prevention and mitigation efforts are overseen by the ones in charge of our science and our technology, and rehabilitation and recovery is overseen by our economic managers. Okay, so it makes logical sense why they are the vice chairs for these particular phases of the disaster management cycle. Meanwhile, these are your members of the NDRRMC. So the secretaries of the DOH, the Environment and Natural Resources, Agriculture, Education, Energy, Finance, Trade and Industry, Transportation and Communications, Budget and Management, Public Works and Highways. All of these agencies oversee sectors that are affected or affect disaster management. Okay, so one of the things that was a reality when I was a child, whenever a typhoon struck the Philippines, was that there would be a power outage that would sometimes last for several days. Okay, I think the longest gone, that it has gone on, when we were living in Santa Rosa, Laguna, was almost a week. Okay, the power was out for almost a week, and then later on, with improved efforts, because there is and has always been improvement. Okay, we don't see it because it's incremental rather than growing in as fast as we want it to be. But it shifted from just say maximum of 2 days to now, where I live in Antipolo. When there's a power outage because of a typhoon, the most that we will have is like half a day before power is restored. But this is because we live in the Greater Manila area, and any interruption in the power is going to be detrimental to economic activity. So you have to restore power as soon as possible for your industry, for the wheels of commerce to turn. Okay. Meanwhile, education. So again, your schooling is affected. Okay. But at the same time, education also helps in training citizens who are aware of disasters, who are effective uh, managers of disasters in their own in their own localized way. Okay, so you have to teach your citizens to be prepared for disasters, to know how to respond to disasters individually, and to how to avoid and prevent disasters themselves. Okay, so these are agencies that oversee sectors that are affected and that can affect uh, disaster management and disasters themselves. And this is not yet the full list because there is the next slide. So these are the other members of the NDRRMC. I won't go through the rest of them. I'm just going to shift from this slide to this slide. So in this slide, you have your civil society organizations, your non-government organizations, and the specialty offices that are presidential appointees, and your government-owned corporations, government-owned and controlled corporations, GOCCs. And the various other unions and leagues for the local governments, civil society organizations, as I've mentioned before, and a representative from the private sector, usually the Private Sector Advisory Council, and the administrator of the Office of Civil Defense. So now that we know this, now that we have the framework, the mandate of the NDRRMC, let's ask a question. What are the most important things to manage during and in the period immediately, so 3 to 4 days after a major disaster? I gave this lecture last year. Around this time last year, there was a flood that all was almost at the same level as Ondoy, and let's just say that Ondoy was singularly one of the worst cases of flooding uh, my in my lifetime. Okay, I didn't study in UERM for medical school, but a lot of my classmates in undergrad went to UERM, and I saw their videos during the time of Ondoy when they were clinical clerks. I saw the doctor who was stuck on the roof of her car as it was being as it floated around the flood waters in the parking lot of the hospital. It was a terrible time. During that time, I had other friends from other medical schools who weren't able to go home despite being done with their 24-hour duty because their homes were submerged in water, or there was no effective public transport. Okay. So when I was making this last year, so 2024, so this was the first time that I delivered this lecture. It was the first time I delivered this lecture. There was also a flood that led to some of our clinical clerks and postgraduate interns having to travel to the hospital through boats. Okay, they were being transported to the hospital on boats, and uh, so yes, consider what happens during after a major disaster, and what are the most important things to manage. Hit the pause button, write it down, and then let's see the next slide. So now that you're done writing it down, let's go down to the disaster risk reduction and management in health, DRRMH. So from the NDRRMC, which is an all sectors, all levels approach, we now go specifically to the sector that is most relevant to us, which is the health sector. And the objectives of DRRMH is to ensure continuity of slash uninterrupted health services. So there has to be a continuity plan, and you have to adhere to that plan. Why? Because health problems don't disappear during a disaster. People will have heart attacks, and sometimes people will likely have more heart attacks because of the stress of being in a disaster situation. Okay, the disasters themselves will no doubt bring about trauma or physical injuries. So you have to ensure that health services are still available and there's continuous or uninterrupted during the time of disaster. Avoid preventable deaths, specifically from uh, yun, the injuries and that I mentioned, and other morbidities, and prevent secondary outbreaks due to disasters. So one thing that we have to note when you live in an evacuation area, because of the limited sanitary toilet facilities, because whenever we make evacuation areas, we don't take into account, of course, that there's going to be several families sharing at best one at best maybe three or four bathroom stalls per uh, gender. Okay, and let's say over 100 people inside a basketball court. So the lack of sanitary toilet facilities, plus the lack of clean drinking water sources, there's a reason why there's a saying that war is 99% diarrhea and 1% glory. Because in reality, war, which is a form of a disaster itself, again, um, is a breeding ground for communicable diseases like infectious diarrhea. Okay. So when we talked about the leadership of the NDRRMC, I made an oblique reference to the disaster management cycle, also known as the emergency cycle by the World Health Organization. And the World Health Organization identifies four different phases to the emergency cycle. So you have your prevention phase or the mitigation phase. So there's prevention, avoiding it altogether, versus mitigation, which is you understand that the disaster is there, but you cannot. Oh, it's raining hard again. I hope that my noise cancellation microphone actually works. But anyway, uh, you understand that the risk is there and it cannot be avoided altogether. So you mitigate it by employing various tools to lessen the impact of the disaster. Okay, so there's prevention, avoiding it altogether, and mitigation, which is lessening the impact because you know you cannot avoid the disaster altogether. And then the preparedness, which is to accumulate resources needed so that in the next part of the cycle response, you can deploy these resources as needed. And then the fourth part is to recover, learn what happened during the disaster, so that during the next time you can either prevent again or mitigate, so lessen it even more. So in the case of, according to my notes, prevent it. So from a health systems perspective, prevention is designing the health system so that health emergencies can be avoided before they do more damage during disasters. And preparedness, meanwhile, is designing the health system so that it can manage any type of health emergency in the event of a disaster. And the response is design the health system so that efficient and effective interventions are utilized during a disaster. And recovery is designing a health system so that there is room for introspection and improvement that will be proactive in addressing the next disaster. So that is how to be a health systems designer while looking at the four different phases of the emergency cycle. Okay? So for your prevention and mitigation phase, so I changed it from the previous slide where it was prevent and then parenthesis mitigate. No, there's actually a distinction between prevention and mitigation. Prevention is avoiding it altogether, while mitigation is understanding that it cannot be avoided altogether. So you have to do everything you can to lessen the impact. Okay. So for prevention slash mitigation, the methods you do are to create infrastructure, so healthcare infrastructure, systems and processes that are resistant to hazards. Whether it is ensuring that you build a hospital or healthcare facility that is resistant to earthquakes and to typhoons, and has the ability for continuity planning. So that means there's a business continuity or a operational continuity. So that means even in the face of a power outage, you have a generator so that your equipment keeps on working, so that your refrigerators that store valuable valuable volatile materials that are affected by extremes in temperature remain stable. Design contingencies in case of disruptions. So, for example, uh, there's a disruption in your duty cycle because, say, a nurse is not able to go to the hospital because the roads have been blocked during civil unrest. So that means you have to find a way to ensure that operations continue smoothly and that you have contingencies in the form of either A, shifting from an 8-hour duty cycle to a 12-hour duty cycle, and having your health human resources for health stay in the hospital for a while, or bringing in human resources for health from other places so that they will operate and they will practice in your healthcare facility. And then lastly, building communities and investing in areas that are not hazard prone. So this is a prevention approach. Okay. So for your preparation phase, disaster management is accepting that disasters and calamities are part of existing or part of existence, and preparing for them is key. So you have to have your services slash business slash operational continuity plans. You have your contingency plans, and you practice your contingency plans. Okay. Uh, I listed in the module on Canvas what to read, how to differentiate between a contingency plan and a continuity plan. Okay, so do the reading on that so that you know what a contingency plan is when you're given an example. What is a contingency plan? What is an operational continuity plan? Again, part of your preparedness is prepositioning of commodities, human resources for health, and items needed for disaster response. Okay? So, hindi pwedeng ora farming lang yung mga gamit mo for disaster disaster response. Okay? You have to be able to deploy them. It has to be where you need them to be. Okay? So, for example, uh, you bought this stack of bandages and band-aids uh, when you have a cut. Okay? And they're at your house. But unfortunately, it happened while you are outside. ah Wala dun sa kotse. Okay? Wala kang band-aids dun sa kotse. So, useless na nasa bahay yung band-aid, yung mga band-aids na yun. Okay? So, dapat meron kang allotment dun sa car. Okay? So, you have your emergency kit in the car and your emergency kit at home. Okay? So, there's that analogy, and then there's your analogy with, say, sorry, not analogy, but an actual matter with our national and local government that I mentioned before. You have all of these state-of-the-art technology, but they're all localized to Metro Manila. What about the other provinces? What about your geographically isolated and disadvantaged areas that need this even more? All of these technologies, all of these commodities for disaster response. Okay? And yeah, you have your risk communications and you have your budgeting. So that's also part of preparation. You must have a budget for disaster preparedness. Okay, and you must have the ability as part of your disaster preparedness to communicate risks to your constituents. So in Marikina, for example, part of that this communication is showing the level of the Marikina River. Okay, there's a live stream of the water level under Marcos Highway Bridge because it signals to those living near the river whether it's time to evacuate to higher areas, time to leave their homes because there is a risk for flooding. Okay? Uh, on my notes, there are analogies for typical male and female preparedness or slash contingencies. This was made at a time that I actually understood. I was making a joke, like how, or I was not making a joke, but making light of the fact that guys or men will have condoms in their wallet because that is part of their contingency. That is part of their own preparedness for a situation, an unexpected situation. Okay. But that is from the perspective of a man. A From the perspective of a woman, on the other hand, they will always have a hygiene kit. They will always have commodities necessary uh, for their menstrual cycle. Okay, and for those of us in the everyday carry hobby or everyday carry community, we have what we call a bug out bag. So, for example, um, have tools inside the bag that I carry whenever I'm outside of the house to address certain situations that I have constantly encountered in the past so that I am not caught flat footed when those situations happen again. And then once you've done preparing, the disaster will strike, and this is how you respond. And effective disaster response is knowing to address the who, what, when, where, how, and even why during and in the immediate period after a disaster. And no, not finally, because this is an emergency cycle. So you're going to go back to your prevention and mitigation after this. You have to recover and rehabilitate. You have to build back better. You have to take lessons from this latest disaster that has struck to prevent repeats and restart of the cycle. Okay, or even if the cycle goes on again, the impact is not felt as much. So for those of us who live in Metro Manila who have been experiencing apocalyptic floods annually, okay, build back better means you have to have an effective flood control program. Okay, that means every year we should actually be seeing fewer and fewer deaths until floods actually go down to zero. And an effective another marker for an effective flood control program is that there are fewer people needing, say, the leptospirosis prophylaxis, which is doxycycline, or even people dying from leptospirosis. Okay, because back when I was a medical student in a government hospital, PGH, the internal medicine ward during rainy season becomes the leptospirosis ward, as all of these beds are taken up by people experiencing Wales disease, which is the worst form of leptospirosis. Okay, because recovery, taking lessons from the last time that a specific disaster has struck can lead to prevention, can lead to lessening the impact of the calamity from happening again. Okay? So consider Ondoy in 2009 when the hospital was still unprepared for that level of flooding to how it is now affecting the hospital. Okay, so back during Ondoy, there were no flood control gates. Now you have flood control gates. Okay, during that time there was a lot of equipment that was damaged. So what did the hospital administration do? The very important equipment was shifted to the higher floors to ensure that they are not damaged by water. Okay, so that's how you effectively manage. Um, that's how you effectively recover, effectively rehabilitate your the individual and the organization when it comes to a disaster. There are keywords that we have to understand whenever we talk about our disaster risk reduction. So these are the important terminologies. They are in the manual. So how you have your hazard, you have your emergency versus disaster. What's the difference between an emergency versus what is a disaster? What is a risk, what is a vulnerability, and what is a capacity, because we will talk about the disaster formula. Okay. Uh, One thing that the United Nations, the UNISDR says is that there is no such thing as a natural disaster. There is always a human component to disasters. Okay. So hazards are any dangerous phenomenon, activity, or substance, whether natural or man-made, that can cause injury, death, and other deleterious effects on health and slash or loss of property. So you have your geological hazards, so either your seismologic or your volcanic hazards. your hydrometeorological hazards, so that includes the strong gale force winds brought about by typhoons or your flooding. You have your biological hazards and you have your human-induced hazards, whether they are technological. So again, disasters can be in the form of, say, an internet outage in this age where everything is connected online, where we are shifting from the analog paper and pen way of records when it comes to patients, where we go to electronic medical records. Uh, one of the um, one of the usual emergencies that happen to health facilities is to have ransomware affecting your patient records. Okay, societal hazards. We're still in a developing country, and when I was in college, no less than two mutinies happened. When I was in medical school, there was also a mutiny that happened in the Peninsula Hotel. So those are examples of human-induced societal hazards. So emergencies are an actual threat to public safety or public health, such as the COVID pandemic, while a disaster is a serious disruption of a community and society with material, economic, environmental, and human losses exceeding the ability of a community or society to cope using its own resources. Again, like I mentioned before, there is no such thing as a natural disaster, only natural hazards. And then you have your risk. So a risk is a health consequence, which are the negative effects of a hazard that can worsen the current health of an unaffected population. And you have your vulnerability, so characteristics and circumstances of a community or society that make it susceptible to a hazard. So such as a, say, for example, you live in a small municipality, so you are likely have a lack of bed space. You have a pandemic, and you need hospital bed space to address people who are sick with a disease. Okay, so lack or unavailability of a resource, for example, or other aspects that make it susceptible to a specific hazard. So, for example, who used to be in Island Province as a doctor to the barrio, would note cases of people suffering from decompression sickness. Why? Because they would use compressor machines to pump air to do spear fishing. Okay, as a form of commercial fishing. So they would dive to get certain kinds of fish, and then they were not properly trained for the timing of their ascent, so they would ascend too quickly, which would form nitrogen bubbles in their bloodstream, which would lead to decompression sickness. Okay, and one of the treatments for decompression sickness is having a hyperbaric oxygen chamber. But there's no hyperbaric oxygen chamber in an island province because who would be able to operate this as well as the upkeep for such equipment. Okay, and you have your capacity. So capacity includes your strengths, attributes, and resources that are available to a community or society to manage and reduce disaster risks. So the disaster formula is risk equals hazard multiplied by vulnerability over capacity. So the higher your hazard and your vulnerability, the higher the risk. But the higher your capacity, say more bed spaces and human resources for health, or available resources, available equipment, the lower the risk. So the World Health Organization core principles of health, emergency, disaster, risk management, okay, EDRM. Uh, the first bullet point, the risk-based approach, is self-explanatory. The second bullet point is notice the addition of readiness in the disaster management cycle. So aside from your prevention, preparedness, there is readiness. So what use is preparedness? So hindi lang aura farming dapat ang preparedness. You have to be ready to use it. Okay? And then your response and recovery. And the third bullet point, also self-explanatory. The fourth bullet point, consider your socio-cultural, gender, and socio-economic contexts that exist within a community and when it has to respond to an emergency. Remember this, okay? The most vulnerable during times of disaster are your marginalized groups and your minority groups, okay? So why? Because certain groups are favored. Certain groups actually don't even experience the disaster. That's why whenever a disaster happens, there are in various agencies, international agencies, there is always a reminder that not everyone faces or experiences disaster in the same way. So let's say in a nuclear war, you have all of the rich and the ultra rich and the ultra wealthy and the powerful being able uh, to stay in bunkers. Okay, whereas other people, ordinary people, will be outside facing the hazards of fallout. Okay. So for your fifth bullet point, it has to be multi-sectoral and multidisciplinary collaboration. We've already talked about this with NDRRMC. It's self-explanatory. With your sixth bullet point, emergency and disaster risk management in health is not the domain of any single specialty or even of the health professions in general. Okay, it should be whole of health system based. And the seventh bullet point, self-explanatory, other ethical considerations, including privacy, including the exploitation of those affected during disasters. Okay, so those are considerations that we have to keep in mind when we actively manage and participate in the disaster cycle process. For the components of your health EDRM functions, I'm not going to read all of these bullet points. Okay, they're there, and you have a copy of my slide deck. The key takeaway for this slide is that the components are too big for any single person nor sector to handle, and should not be claimed solely by one person or one sector as domain experts. Okay, it should be participatory, multi-sectoral, and multidisciplinary. So again, it's a reason why it's a council, a National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council, and not a department of disaster management. Okay, you don't want to centralize. You want everyone horizontally and vertically participating in disaster management. So, a brief note before we move on about the relationship between the WHO and its member states. So, the WHO is a specialized agency of the United Nations, governed by the World Health Assembly that meets annually. They set global health standards and policies that member states are encouraged but not necessarily required to adopt. Okay, why? Because we will move on to the next slide. And we will see if there is if we are adopting these policies here in the Philippines. So components of the disaster risk management for your health for the WHO, there is your governance, your policy planning, and coordination. And these key components now have to be localized in the Philippines are indications of DRRMH institutionalization. So the indicators include DRRMH plan that is updated, approved, disseminated, and regularly tested. Okay? A functioning, organized, and trained health emergency response team. So whether it is a public health team or a health uh, specialized healthcare team that is based in a healthcare facility. Available and accessible essential health commodities, and a functional operation center. Note, so you need to have an OPSEN or an operation center whenever you do DRRMH. Okay, so you have a command center that is basically your central nervous system that coordinates and takes in data, uh, synthesizes this data, understands this data so that it knows how to act on this data. So for our DRRMH planning, you have to have it is a participative process that studies your hazards, your risk, vulnerabilities, and capacities of a specific area or community. It is systematic, systemic, strategic, evidence-based, and consultative, and ensures resilient health systems and institutions. And it involves contingency planning, which is a process that analyzes specific potential events to a place or community that threatens the health of the population, and possible arrangements and workarounds as timely, effective, and appropriate responses. So this is usually scenario based. Meanwhile, you also need to have a service or business continuity plan, which is a process that recognizes the hazards and the risks that an institution faces and the methods to protect both the personnel and the operational functions of the institution so that services or businesses are not interrupted. So consider the recent rains. Okay, you can't have interruptions dun sa operations of your hospital. Okay? So you have to have ways to ensure that services or your let's face it, because it's a private institution, that the business itself is not interrupted, and define these potential risks and how it will affect your operation, implement safeguards and procedures to mitigate these risks, and test and review these procedures regularly. And DRRMH planning also involves creating an evacuation plan so that when everything fails, how do you save your personnel from becoming casualties in a disaster? And also, lastly, a communication plan, because DRRMH is participatory and involves systems in the community and one must be able to transmit information including the available and unavailable resources as well as assistance that is needed or that can be extended. So, who is involved in DRRMH planning? So, it's usually the head of office. So, whether it's the health secretary, your regional director for health, your provincial health officer, your municipal health officer, the medical director, the university president, or say the dean of the College of Medicine, depending on which level or which institution is doing the DRRMH planning. So, for example, for you guys, for DRRMH planning, usually the head of office is the dean of the College of Medicine, but immediately above him is your university president, because The College of Medicine doesn't exist in a vacuum. You have your other institutions, you have your other colleges in UERM, MMCI. And then you have your focal person, so you have your disaster management chief, disaster management chief, and then you have various committee members from other divisions, other sectors or sections, other departments. So you have your technical personnel, you have your general services, and your first responders, and other health clusters, your public health specialists, your medical specialists, and your sanitation or hygiene experts, and mental health and psychosocial support professionals. So these are your steps into conducting your DRRMH planning, from preparing to data gathering and analysis, developing or updating the plan when you see potential gaps, integrating and translating the plan, implementing the plan, monitoring and evaluating your plan. So when you prepare the plan, it's usually an impetus from the head of the institution. So usually from the Secretary of Health if you are working in the DOH. And usually they will convene the DRRMH planning committee. Then you do your data gathering and analysis, understand what are the existing hazards, the health risks, the vulnerabilities, and the capacities of the institution. Uh, Gather your baseline data, conduct a situational analysis, which is usually your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So yung strengths are positives that you can change, weaknesses are negatives that you can change, opportunities are positives you cannot change, and threats are negatives that you cannot alter. Okay? And you do your hazard identification and mapping, and then your risk assessment, vulnerability assessment, and finally your capacity assessment. So consider the following when you do your vulnerability assessment: the access to health services, the health status of the populations, including the disease burden. So for example, in an area where there are a lot of chronic patients with chronic kidney disease, i.e. people who need dialysis, and you have, say, a hazard that can lead to power outages. So what do you do? Okay, you need to have generators that will take over in case of these power outages, so that there's still access to hemodialysis operations. And if that's not possible, or if these are overwhelmed, you need to have to train your personnel, your nephrologists, in how to do peritoneal dialysis, which doesn't require power. Okay. Then you have you also again going back to the previous lecture, the first lecture, your social determinants of health. What are the housing conditions? What is the baseline sanitation in the area? Your water access. What is the level of education commonly seen in this community? And then identify your vulnerable groups, your indigenous people, your indigents. So there's the indigenous people, and then your indigents, and then your marginalized groups, the minorities. Okay. And note other social and organizational contexts, the different leaderships in health, politics, existing structures, factions, and community participants, and identify your motivational and attitudinal context. What are the health-seeking behaviors? What pushes your population to do health-seeking behaviors, and any biases towards change and the locus of control with health risks. And then your capacity assessment in data gathering is what assets does the institution have to address the hazards and minimize the risks? Is there an internal RMH institutionalization? Is there already an existing system for disaster management within your institution? And is there an external disaster management system? Okay, so if these are already existing, why recreate the wheel when you can build upon what is already existing, provided that it can work in theory? Okay, because if it ignores the local context, say uh, it's built for let's say there's a disaster management plan for blizzards, and you're living in the Philippines, okay, which is a tropical country. So that's not going to be relevant, okay. And then you develop or update the plan, use the gathered data, create effective strategies, and prioritize as to risks, the likelihood, and the feasibility and cost effectiveness. And keep in mind what essential health services need to operate with regards to the plan. And again, we always highlight this. It has to be multidisciplinary and multisectoral in its approach. And this is the most participatory step of DRRMH planning, because you have to have all of your different sectors, different divisions, different groups doing the DRRMH plan. Okay? Then you have to translate and integrate the plan, whether yeah, we have to create a disaster risk reduction and management plan, a work and financial plan. Again, like I said, disaster management, a lot of it is all about your resources, particularly monetary resources, local investment plan for health, and your gender and development plan. And then you implement it through operationalization, execution, and implementation, and also proper utilization and accounting of the funding for your disaster plan. And then you do your monitoring and evaluation. This should be a regular activity done at least every 3 years. This is important for accountability and transparency processes, but also because it allows room for improvement and generate insights to support or augment working policies and programs on DRRMH and capacity building, identify the gaps, and recognize good practices and reward the good practices. So, the things to consider after this lecture: this disaster planning does not have to be just on an institutional level. It can be with social groups, whether it is your barkada, your friend group, your support group. It can even be on an individual level. But again, we do not, no person is alone. There has to be mutual aid. Okay? Planning is nothing without actual practice, and drills and exercises are needed to test your strategies and activities. Proper disaster management in health is all encompassing, but at the same time, simple enough for all stakeholders to understand and follow. Alternate frameworks for disaster management, ones that are outside of the scope of this lecture. For those of the individual to small group, the regional and national collective levels and communes include your mutual aid disaster relief, including your mutual aid networks, and your another example are your community pantries. These are the sources for our um, these are the sources for our that I used for this lecture. Okay, and we're done. I will see you in the Q&A.